Hello, everybody. I hope y'all are doing well. This is our last lecture for the course. It's really hard to believe it's already come to this ending. It's been a very fast semester session, and surprised as much as y'all are how fast this went by. So this is going to be a pretty short lecture. It's just some wrap-up points and stuff like that. We're going to talk a little bit about criminal justice informatics, and then couple of wrap-up points, and that's pretty much it for this course, and all you have to do is finish up your final and you're done. So let's start with some of the material we're going to cover today and wrap up the material aspect first. So we're going to start by talking about criminal justice informatics, and I'm going to start by talking about kind of like the history of informatics. So y'all, this is pretty much a review talking about kind of the history of technology, essentially. Prior to the 1980s, there was a big reliance on paper and typewriters. I'm sure you're aware of this already. But once it got to about the 1980s, we started having like mainframe computers. And then once it got to the 1990s, computers were more accessible, cheaper. They weren't smaller yet, for sure, but they were easier to obtain and stuff like that. So organizations began to have more of them. And then with the advent of the internet, it sped the growth of information systems and informatics and stuff like that. And criminal justice organizations can then use these. Because without that internet, communications had to rely on like local networks. But these local networks tended to be too expensive for organizations to like fund the bill. So it wasn't really used too much. So it's kind of like a brief history of informatics / technology. Like I said, kind of a review, but quick rundown about, especially on the organization side of it. So what is a informatic? So informatics is a discipline of information science, and information science is basically a discipline about the science of collecting, organizing, storing, analyzing, governing, all sorts of that stuff, data, and information to organizations. So essentially, collecting, storing data and information in a way that is accessible, easily accessible, and maintained. So basically maintaining all of that information that organizations need. You can also include data mining here as well, data analysis stuff that it takes into it. But this is more of it as in a broader sense is what it is. But for criminal justice specific in a criminal justice context, essentially is information systems that criminal justice organizations are going to use on a regular basis. So it's the stuff like using computers inside cop cars to cataloging evidence, running your ticket up, all these little things that produces records and stuff like that, all lead into a organizational system or an information system that can be accessed. A lot of criminal justice organizations are going to have their own unique system, so we're going to talk about later how this is an issue. But a lot of the time they have their own system and own setup of how they store and utilize this information. So that's essentially what informatics means, especially in a criminal justice related context. This chapter also talks about the idea of an automation boundary, and essentially what that automation boundary is like a boundary between doing work by hand and doing work through algorithms and coding and stuff like that. So examples like that boundary has been changed to where some things are automatic. Like you can write a code that'll go to Twitter and scrape data for you. I know researchers who have done that, where they create this long code which will go in and scrape data off of Google or other websites, and you'll have a data set there. real fast and easy, and it's done all by the computer, and you don't have to do it hand by hand or anything like that. So it's kind of that boundary versus like doing things by hand, where like if I was looking to pull tweets about Trump, if I was doing it by hand, I would have to go on Twitter and type in his name and write down or copy each of his tweets down, each tweet that somebody else wrote about him, all of that. And it would take me days, years, months to do, versus where I could write a code and it could go in and pull anything that relates to Trump off Twitter in a form, ethical issues aside, and produce something in a lot less time. You do it while you're asleep and stuff like that, where the computer just runs it and does it for you. And that's how a lot of coding is done, especially for research projects that I'm a part of. You write code and computer does all the complicated statistics for you. It produces the output, and you have something which is taking like thousands and thousands of pieces of little data points and organizing them into something that is shareable and easier to digest. So another example that the book also mentions too is how cop cars now have, if you've seen police cars, they have little computers and stuff like that inside. And that wasn't always the case, but it is more now, to where they can enter information. If they arrest somebody, you can enter in information on that computer, and it's sent straight to jail. So if they arrested somebody and they're taking them to jail, the people at jail already know they're coming and have the information they need to speed the booking process along. So that way it speeds it up and it doesn't take as long, because cops are able to do the front end of the work with all the paperwork and stuff on a computer and send it directly to them in seconds, and it's there before they even get there. So that would be an example too. So I'm going to go over some of like the types of information systems, and I categorize it as broad, mainly because this could be applied to any organization, not necessarily criminal justice specific ones. I have some examples of these applied to criminal justice systems in a minute, but organizations, in a minute. But these are pretty broad in different types, and I'm going to try to go through these and give examples as I go. Not just criminal justice specific, but other specific too. So the book mentions about 6 of these, and there are different types. So the first one would be like a transaction processing, and a lot of those will capture and record transactions. So like cash drawers or something like that. If you've ever worked in like fast food and stores and stuff like that, you have your cash drawer and you have a system where you type in information, produce a transaction, stuff like that. So that would kind of be an example of that transaction processing. So, and the information after you put it in there can be processed in a management information system where it can produce reports so that management can look at it and say, we made $1,000 in sales on Tuesday, because they have all those little raw transaction data and produce something that management can understand. So that results in like a management area. So you can see how the transaction processing information can be used in the management area as well. So number 3 would be a executive information system, and a lot of these are like for organization executives, so like people high up in the organization, and you can use it to monitor like environment, competition, other organizations, what they're doing, and stuff like that. So they can monitor things at a different level. That would be like an executive information system. And I don't really have a really good example for that one, but I have examples for some of the others. So those are the first 3. Additionally, there are 3 others. Decision support systems. These helpful in decision making. You can enter information and then it produces like a scenario of what would happen if these variables were met. You think of it like, at least when I was in undergrad, we had like, I don't know if it's here at FSU or not, I don't remember seeing it. It was like a degree works where it tracks your progress if after you take your courses, tracks like how many courses you need until graduation and stuff like that. But the interesting thing was like it had a what if section, and you could change it to change. You can play with it to like say if I made this GPA or this grade in these classes, what my GPA would be. So you can play with it into decisions, create decisions. You could also do it to where if you took, say you wanted to change your major, it had that option too. So you could see like what classes would transfer where, and if it would make it longer, make your path to graduation longer. Because when I was in undergrad, and I started undergrad in 2013, I went from my first semester, I was an art major for graphic design. And I decided very quickly that that was definitely not the way to go. So I switched, and I remember switching. And none of my classes, of course, transferred because nobody needs art in psychology. And I decided to major in psychology, minor in criminal justice. I almost double majored in criminal justice. I should have double majored, in all honesty. But, oh well. But, like I said, you can play with the little the scenarios, and it'll produce some kind of what if scenario. If I changed my major to art, what classes would I still need? What classes didn't transfer? And stuff like that. So that's the best example I can think for like a decision support. It's like a degree works or something. At least that's what we called it for when I went to undergrad. That's what we called it. I think we have something similar here, but I don't know the ins and outs of FSU's programming very well yet. So the fifth one, now that I have that tangent taken care of, are communication support systems. And these allow people to communicate with each other. So good examples of this. Social media we know and love. Some of our social media are examples like when you Facebook message each other, Instagram, Twitter, of course. Social media accounts are all examples of communication with each other. At one point, IMing was a thing, and you had that. That would have been an example here, and stuff like that. Text messaging, all that. And be using social media, but I think social media is like the biggest example of this right now. Most recent and relevant, because everybody knows social media. Of course I do. I have my accounts and stuff like that. And I use it to keep in track of people home and stuff like that. And broadcasting. I also broadcast my school stuff and everything else, and programming and stuff like that. So that's a communication support system example. There's also other examples for communication supports too. And then the last one would be like office support systems. So you think of those like Microsoft Office. That's how I'm thinking of it, is like those programs that help you to like write presentations like I'm doing now, my lectures, my lecture notes, slides. So you're creating and sharing these documents with each other and editing them. You can also use them like different programs to produce work schedules and stuff like that, emails and all that. I think emails aren't going to be an example of the communication, but Outlook, like the Outlook plugin that we use, app for university email and stuff like that, is an example of the office support. So I think email would be more of a communication thing, but kind of depends on which part you're looking at. So of the broad ones, that's those 6, and some examples of each as best I could. So we're going to take this and apply them to criminal justice specifically. And the book mentions several of these, and I thought of a couple of them too. So reports, police reports, accident reports, incident reports, body cam data, that kind of stuff is going to be an example of a transaction process. Those are transactions, in air quotes, for a criminal justice organization. So if you're looking at a police department, that would be their transactions. And then if you go up a couple steps, for executive and decision making, you would use like police records as examples, or court records that have records of like hearings and stuff like that, and rap sheets and all that. You could use those as from an executive standpoint, or you could use them in decision making. and saying, this police department in Tallahassee arrested 50 young males, as an example. You'd be able to say, is this enough? Is this too lenient? Is this, or you can examine it like, you have use of force examples, like you said, this police department utilized force, unnecessary force, 90% of the time, or something crazy like that. You could do this, you'd use the record management, and you could produce decision making and stuff like that based on what you find. So those are some examples. So most of the systems that are used in criminal justice organizations are going to be the form of like the management ones, management information. So a couple examples of these, vendors, you'd use management information systems for like keeping track of your vendors, for delivering food and stuff like that to prisons, healthcare files, or employment files for prisons, like if their infirmary ward has to keep track of like health history and stuff like that, or HR has to keep track of employment files, and anytime they have to have discipline, there's disciplinary reports and stuff like that. That would all be an example of like that management information systems example. So in 2016, I'm probably going to butcher his name, but Iamo had suggested several more types of like criminal justice specific information systems. So I kind of listed a couple of these examples, which could include like you have your 911 services, you have dispatch services like saying who's going where to what incident. You're sending one person to one end of the county or city or whatever in the jurisdiction, and others somewhere else. Again, record management, like we talked about previously, crime analysis and mapping could be an example. You can use mapping software and map where crimes are or have taken place and stuff like that. I've done that before. I've taken classes and stuff like that on crime mapping and analysis and stuff like that, and that was really interesting. So it's an example of that information system as well to do. So we're going to talk about a couple of like the problems with informatics. There's a few problems, and a lot of these are common sense, and other ones is like they're going to be a problem no matter what. So data sharing is going to be a big issue between different organizations. So like I said earlier, criminal justice organizations, a lot of them use a different type of system each time. So if you go to Leon County, may use one type of system, and then the county beside us, you go to Jacksonville or something, and they're using a completely different one. So if you want to think about this problem, think about it as each organization or each county, each police department is trying to speak a different language and share a different language, and they're trying to communicate each other, but people from one group are not going to understand the language of the other group. So that's kind of the issue, is nobody can understand each other. So your main solution here would be to like create a universal information system for criminal justice. So that way everybody uses the same system, everybody speaks the same language, in this case. Language being your information system that you're using. That would be a way to solve that issue. In addition to that main issue, that's the biggest issue, I would say. In addition, there's always issues with data quality. If you've taken like research methods classes and stuff like that, you know a little bit about data quality issues. If sometimes police departments don't want to share information or don't want to report it accurately, and that comes issues with other self-report and stuff like that. So if there's issues with data quality in the front end, there's going to be issues with data quality at the back end as well. So the book kind of says it like garbage in, garbage out. So if you're not keeping good tabs on your information and organizing your information and keeping track and having good quality data, you're not going to produce good quality results. So that's kind of what I mean by issues with data quality. So there's also a couple more uses of informatics in the criminal justice. So criminal justice organizations can also rely on their system in order to broadcast what they do. So it makes it easier. Sometimes they can look at their information and, like I said, like data sets, and they can produce a pretty graph that summarizes the information they're trying to tell other people. Say, look, crime rates have dropped 15% since 2018. They try to make it easy and understandable to the general public to see what's going on. You can also use this information to do to evaluate progress. And what I mean there is, like, if you're looking for your goals, like we talked about last time, you can use this information to see how much progress you've made to get to that goal. Sometimes academics, so like professors and stuff like that, when they're doing their research, they may request data from certain organizations like these, like police departments and stuff like that, and they want to take a look at the data and like play with it and see what they can find. And sometimes they can use it in ways to like improve other criminal justice organizations, or they may find things that might help the system at large. So like on a general level, they might find something. So informatics is kind of like, it's very important to like have good data and have good information systems and stuff like that, especially in a criminal justice aspect here, as we talk about. So that was a brief kind of summary of what chapter 14 was talking about, and information systems and stuff like that. This was kind of interesting in a ways because it's more data driven and stuff that I understand a lot easier to find examples for, and I have relevant examples here. But yeah, so quickly we're gonna run through this, a recap for the day. We talked about the history and what criminal justice informatics actually means. We also talked about that automation boundary and how that boundary can be moved. Sometimes everything's done by hand, and I give you that example of like pulling information off of Twitter, how it would take years to do it by hand, but you could write a code to do it in a couple seconds. Not a couple seconds, like probably a couple minutes, but produce something. And then you go into like the broad systems. So we have 6 of those, and then we also tried to apply them to the criminal justice. And we talked about how a lot of them are going to be management information, or records management and stuff like that. And we talked about Iamo's contributions, and he talked about how, or she talked about there's other specific criminal justice related ones as well, which includes like 911 services and dispatch and stuff like that. And then lastly, we talked about some issues such as data quality issues and data sharing issues, and how everybody is using a different language to gather their information, but when it comes time to share, nobody speaks the same language, and that's an issue. And that's kind of like our metaphor for this. We talked about we talked about a couple examples of other uses that information is used for. So with that, we're pretty much wrapped up for this lecture. And I also wanted to take a minute to say farewell and thank you and everything. I know this has not been the easiest semester set up. We definitely did not expect to be online over this 6 weeks. We should have been in the classroom, but because of unforeseen circumstances, it's made that difficult. I had to quickly scrape together this course from being a traditional face-to-face to something that was so I can do it online. And like I said earlier, like this is one of my first times of teaching a course completely solo. So not only did I had to account for the fact that COVID was happening and we couldn't have an online class or on-campus class and stuff like that. In addition, I was creating a class and teaching for the first time as the main professor. And like I said earlier, it's definitely been a unique experience, and I tried to make it so that way, because I wanted to make sure everybody was going to do well, and I wanted to make sure that everybody had the chance to get the information they needed, and because everybody has a unique circumstance at the moment, being the fact that we have kids and animals, and of course my animals have popped into lectures millions of times and harassed me, so from working at home and stuff like that, so and kids and having kids running around. And so I made sure that everything was going to be accessible no matter what, at any time of the day, which I hoped was helpful, especially these recordings, because I feel like if I just threw this information up online, it wouldn't be as informative as it is you listening to my voice and hearing examples, and I'm trying to relate it to something that y'all would understand better. Yeah, I definitely would rather have it face to face so I can take questions and we could discuss these in more detail and have more conversations, but because of what happened, I'm okay with, I thought it went pretty well. I was very impressed with everybody's work ethic and handling everything, everything well. Everybody's been a good group. I didn't have issues. I didn't see anything that was necessarily wrong. Everybody did their work and interacted with each other. So I wanted to take a minute to say thank you for being a good class and everything. Going forward, I'm going to provide, after the final, I'm going to grade finals and projects and everything. And I'm going to try to have grades up a little early so that way you can take a look at it before everything's submitted to FSU. And I'll let you know when everything is entered into the grade books. So keep an eye out for that stuff. I think I listed in the syllabus what day everything should be turned in on and everything. So that'll, if you need to look back, I would look at the syllabus to see what dates for everything. But yeah, that's pretty much it that I have. Everybody did really well, and I also wanted to sit here and say, because I know a lot of y'all are seniors or juniors, saying congratulations to the ones who are graduating either this summer or in the fall, in December in the fall. I want to congratulate everybody a little bit early, saying congratulations, because it's a big deal graduating from college and everything, even during this rather unique and crazy semester. And like I said, thank you for being a great group of students. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out and say so. Feel free to reach out and talk about the course or anything else. I definitely will respond to emails and remember y'all. So feel free to reach out. And if you all are juniors and seniors, you might see me up on the rosters as teaching other classes in the fall and spring, as I get my feet wet and moving on in my next years of getting my PhD. But yeah, so like I said, if y'all have any questions, need anything, let me know. But thank you for being a great group. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the last time and have a great afternoon, evening, and everything else.